Welcome, everybody, to the weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. My name is Shannon Boucher. I'm here with my co-host, Melanie Bennett. We've been on again, off again with the Gender Wars Report in the last 6 weeks or so. And so much has happened this week. We say that almost every week that we're on. So much is happening. But we had a really big week this week with the Amy Hamm hearings out in BC. And I thought we'd get together, Melanie, and chat a little bit about the hearings. If you're on X, formerly Twitter, I pinned my coverage to my profile and I put them in I forget what they call it now, highlights or something. So I ran a stream of tweets for both days. They're connected in sequence, and you can learn all about, as best I could, what the lawyers were saying, what was happening during the hearings. Melanie, you tuned in as well. And I thought we talked generally about, impressions of the Amy Hamm hearings. A little bit of background for those who don't know. Amy Hamm is a nurse. She's a psychiatric nurse and nurse educator in Vancouver. And several years ago, she was involved with a project with Chris Elston, better known as Billboard Chris, and they put up a billboard, I Heart J.K. Rowling, in Vancouver. And Vancouver City Council, I think it was an emergency meeting, although that might be just histrionic of me to say, but they held a meeting of council, and within about 36 hours, the billboard had been vandalized with paint bombs and paint cans, and then it was taken down as hate speech, condemned by Vancouver City Council. Following that, Amy Hamm faced anonymous complaints against her with the BC Nurses and Midwives College, BCCNM, BC College of Nurses and Midwives. And it has now been 3 years, 22 days of hearings, longer trial than the O.J. Simpson trial.
Do we know if we're ever going to be able to see that publicly again, do you think? Or was that maybe just live, and if you missed it, you missed it?
I believe it's public record. And if it's not public record after it's done, we should be able to FOIA it, Freedom of Information Act. They call that MFIPA in Ontario, Municipal Freedom of Information.
Yeah, because for anybody who didn't get a chance to watch the first session or this latest session, it was quite interesting to watch. And had a lot of well-known people speaking, and there was a lot of I don't know too much of the history before this trial started, but I imagine they had to fight to get it public, like on what was it, WebEx? Yep. I imagine that had to be fought for, because I imagine, and this is speculation on my part, I don't know this for sure, maybe you know, Shannon, but I imagine the prosecution side would have wanted to keep that behind closed doors.
Yeah, but
do you know anything about that?
There was technical problems with getting access to it. Now, these kinds of hearings and trials in Canada, unless it's family court, where those hearings are sealed to protect children, court process in Canada is public.
Oh, right. Okay. That's my speculation. I had no idea what I'm saying then.
Yeah, and it should be public. That's transparency in our judicial system. I covered, I can't remember if it was 3 or 4 days of this back in October, November, when there were key witnesses who were testifying. So Dr. James Cantor, who was formerly of CAMH, Canadian Association of Mental Health Clinic in Toronto. He worked with Ken Zucker, and huge depth of research as an expert in the area of James Cantor's expertise is in the area of sexual. It's not called fetishes anymore. It's called paraphilias. Yeah, and there's some crossover because he was head of the clinic for a number of years. There's crossover into the labels around transgenderism, and Cantor gave excellent testimony. And then Dr. Kathleen Stock from Sussex University in the UK, who is a professor of philosophy who was canceled and has been talking about, she's been part of the core of the group of women, particularly in the UK, who've been pushing back against this stuff. They're ahead of the curve from what we have in Canada or where we currently are in Canada. She testified as well. I'm missing somebody, I think. Oh, Coach Linda Blade also testified in the fall. And what we heard Monday and Tuesday this week was the closing oral arguments. So since November, early November, the lawyers for the college and the lawyers for Amy Hamm have been preparing their written submissions. And Monday and Tuesday was they were basically presenting their written submissions and the oral argument summaries of those submissions before the college. So day one, we had
Day one was rough. Was rough because that was our fair Babs, tiny b, lowercase b, talking. I mean, this I'm just gonna say this woman is very difficult to listen to. It's not just the content of what she's saying, which is very difficult to listen to, but the tone of voice, the speech patterns. This woman, somebody commented online something about Babs salivating over wanting to shut people down. I'm thinking she just sounds like she's salivating all the time. So it was difficult to listen to on many fronts, absolutely. But you can go to. I just wanted to say that was hard for me to listen to that day.
Yes, and I was somewhat prepared for it because I'd heard her before, and she's very
difficult. That I don't know what it is about. Maybe it's because I hadn't. So I listened to the first part of the sessions. What was it, November? I can't remember. It was a while ago.
Yeah,
and she was always difficult to listen to, but there was something. She was just slower than normal this week. There was just it was just long and slow, and she is going over incidents after incident after incident, what she considers to be transphobia for hours and hours. Like I was at work, and I'm glad that I was also working at the same time because
it broke down. So the days broke down kind of as follows. In each of the presentations, so day one was Barbara Finley presenting. Barbara has a long history of activism in trans rights dating back to the mid 90s. So she's been pushing this for a long time. She represented the prosecution, I guess, or the other side of the Vancouver rape relief case. They were trying to deny them funding, and there was a whole bunch of legal process and proceedings. I mean, lawyers play dirty tricks. Like I wouldn't want to be a lawyer. It's a very difficult game, especially in litigation. And Finley plays a lot of word games. So the first part of the day was her oral arguments, and then when she finished presenting those, what the college did, which took about 2 hours or 2.5 hours, they came back after lunch and spent the rest of the day asking her questions. Where exactly is the where's the discrimination? Where are these offending tweets? And then one of the big arguments was, where is the nexus of the public speech on Amy's private time and her identification as a nurse? Because the college argument is that she's representing the college, speaking as a nurse, bringing disrepute to the profession. And so they were arguing about this, and the tweets that were coming up. What I gathered by the end of the day, and Lisa Bildy talked about this as well on Tuesday. Same format, oral presentation in the first part, a long presentation, and then questions from the panel. But it came pretty clear that Amy, and in fact, perhaps none of us in Canada, if this is decided in favor of the college against Amy Hamm, can say that biological women deserve their own safe spaces. Yeah. Because just the act of saying that apparently is discriminatory towards trans women and trans girls, and I put those in quotation marks. As we know, we don't believe that those actually exist. People can dress however they please, if we're going to reference J.K. Rowling, who came up a lot in the trial. But but really these are men, these are male-bodied people who don't belong in these spaces and in sports. And when all of Amy's tweets were kind of read out in sequence over the course of a couple hours, as Babs was drawing, as you were saying, dragging it out and dragging it out, conveniently forgot her annotated report. So she had to go line by line and sit there holding everybody in silence.
It was long. It seemed to me that it was trying to say almost anything that in any way critiques or can be viewed as critiquing trans ideology. I mean, in any way would be brought up as far as Babs is concerned as unable to speak in public because it somehow is unprofessional for nurses. Now, nurses are supposed to be able to understand the difference between males and females. They should understand that because they're in nursing, and nursing is in the medical field, and the medical field understands that there are fundamental differences between male and female that need to be understood if you're going to give proper treatments, you know? So I find that really, really, really interesting. But yeah, it did drag on quite a bit.
I was kind of jumping in my chair on Tuesday, and I talked to Lisa when we were in Toronto a couple of weeks ago for the Women's Day event. And I talked to Lisa Bildy a few times before. Lisa, one of the lawyers for Amy's defense, and it's the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms that is providing the channel for both Lisa Bildy and Karen Basto. Karen Basto is a criminal lawyer in BC and has been involved. She was actually on the other side of the table from Barbara Finley during that Vancouver rape relief legal dispute some years ago. So no stranger to dealing with Barbara Finley. And at one point, I'm going to pull it up.
But Barbara Finney's all over the place. I tend to watch a lot of, or I try to find and watch a lot of Canadian, I guess, activist content. So when activist groups get together, often they'll have Zoom calls and then they'll share their Zoom calls. And there was one anti-parents' rights one that came out just after the Alberta decision. I think it was Simon Fraser University. And they put out a Zoom call. And Barbara Finley was in the crowd there too, you know, asking questions of this panel who were talking about how parents' rights are transphobic and horrible and we need to stop it. There was a panel of trans-identified people, and there was also a CBC journalist who was the moderator for this particular speech. So Barbara Finley seems to pop up pretty much everywhere.
Yes. She's been at this a long time. I was just reviewing a chapter that I wrote for a book for the Canada Strong and Free Network. I was asked to write a chapter around advocacy and public advocacy last year, and I described something and actually mentioned Barbara Finley in that, something I called precedent scaffolding. And precedent scaffolding is a long, it's kind of like the long march through the institutions, but it's a long process of changing legislation and changing laws. So, you know, you start with the objective that you know, in the mid 80s, there was an initial push to normalize transsexual men and their mobility within society, and there really wasn't anything in law to support that. And then there began these small cases that one built on the other. And one of the really frightening things, like at the end of Monday, I can't imagine Amy's state of mind. But after those hours of testimony and after all those questions and after all the tweets came up and all the hammering from the lawyers for the college, it felt pretty dark.
Yeah, it was brutal.
And Finley was citing all these cases and claiming that, I think their closing for the day was, your decision comes from well-trodden ground, or there's a well-trodden path to justify your decision here, because they'd cited all these legal precedents. They talked about the Barry Neufeld Supreme Court decision after Glenn Hansman of the BCTF had defamed Barry around SOGI issues that going back getting close to 7 years ago now. SOGI just started to come into BC. Talked about the Carolyn Brodowski case and how the courts kicked the responsibility and authority to the school board, basically, for censoring and defaming Carolyn Brodowski. and cited some of these cases around the SLAP legislation. They cited the what's the Regina U.S. Pride, UR Pride from
RU Pride,
Saskatchewan.
Regina University Pride. That was
Yeah,
a Saskatchewan case this fall. I think it was this fall.
yeah. And the notwithstanding clause, they cited all kinds of these legal precedents. Now, I I knew most of them. I'd either read the decisions or familiar with them or know the people involved in them, and I was surprised because, like I said, like some of the legal games is dirty tricks, right? So I felt like she was sewing things together and making a lot of tenuous connections, but the sheer volume of precedents that she was citing were suggesting that this was, this was the job of the college to find Amy guilty.
Well, yeah, and she would be right. That this is the thing that when she was naming all of those, I thought actually she does have a point. There are many, many precedents, and that my understanding of how I've come through this is a lot of ideological stuff, or learning a lot about the ideology behind it, not necessarily the trans studies side, but the whole picture. And one thing that's become clear to me in Canada is that marginalization is a really important concept. And so to achieve equity, which we understand as equal outcomes, what you have to do is you have to equalize, I guess, or yeah, we'll call it equalize. So if you have like a bell curve in a population, most people are going to be in the middle, but that's privilege. So you can't have that. And then to reach equity, what you have to do is you have to bring the tail ends of that bell curve up, right? You're not necessarily cutting their legs off, although that can happen, but that's not what they're trying to do. But what you do is you raise up the most marginalized. And that's why the idea of the people with the privilege, so in this case, it would be the cis, as in not trans people, and it would be, someone who is white, for example, because they are the hegemonic race, I guess, in Canada, Eurocentric, all these things. So all of these privileged things, which Amy Hamm represents, cis, white, European descent, settler colonial, all of these things that Amy Hamm represents, well, you can't really, in this kind of, equity mindset, you can't really look at Amy as having or having anything done to her, but you have to understand that the most marginalized in this case, which would be the trans people, the poor trans people, are not getting their way. Doesn't matter what the attitude is, doesn't matter what the effect of what they're doing is. The point is they're marginalized and they are a group. So everything is about identity, and that identity group is marginalized. And so you have to raise them up. And so you see case after case after case in Canada, which is in favor of whatever group identity that is
Just
viewed as
automatically,
marginalized,
yeah.
right?
Because the historic trans kids have been so historically marginalized, then it's acceptable for the head of a 70,000 member union to attack an individual, abuse them publicly, defame them, destroy their position, allege
Village
that they're
power. Yeah.
pedophiles, and make their lives miserable. And that's, according to the Supreme Court, terrifyingly, that's acceptable because the group that the union leader supposedly was defending is this victim group, this minority victim group.
Privilege
And
power. That's the thing. And so this is a real concern that I have with the law here, right? The law seems to be more and more viewing groups of people rather than individuals.
yeah,
And so it's like the Borg, it's like social engineering, right? So if you belong to a group, it will be viewing you as that group, and everyone in that group is somehow has some kind of characteristics associated with them, but not individuals. We're not really talking about individuals and the merit of what that individual is doing or not doing. So that's what concerned me at the end of that day. Is I thought, if I'm looking at it from my perspective, of course this is ridiculous. But if I'm looking at it from the perspective of social justice, if I'm looking at it from the perspective of many of these people, even in the college, in the law, who do adopt these ideas of equity, diversity, inclusion, they are hearing group identity and they are hearing marginalized, and therefore they understand that those people need to be elevated. So yeah, that first day really was rough, but the second day was much more in line with my own, and I believe your own values. There's a huge difference of free
yes,
speech.
yes. Well, going back to the first day a little bit. So I've been some of you know that I have an AI, a public sentiment AI, quite a sophisticated one. It's quite an expensive one that I have periodic access to, and I have live access to it at the moment. And I asked the Canadian public through this AI that scrapes social media and public news and information what the position of the Canadian public was, and asked the question in a number of different ways. The worst ratio that I got was that 14% of the people think Amy Hamm should lose her license. The other 86% of people don't. And when the question was even framed in a different way, it was actually more in favor of Amy Hamm. So when the public understands this, and that Amy is speaking as an individual, Amy is speaking about biological reality. Amy is talking about women's rights in sports and these other issues, and the public feels she should be allowed to do this and shouldn't face repercussions for it. So the college is kind of in a precarious position. This case, because it dates back 3 years, really hasn't caught up with the current moment, and the current moment is really shifting in terms of public opinion. Last few weeks, puberty blockers are announced, blocking puberty blockers in the UK. Germany's done the systematic review, or the review of the systematic review from the UK. France has made an announcement about puberty blockers. It's become like the majority of the public is against trans women taking over women's sports and taking trophies and things. Like the public awareness on this issue has really shifted compared to a couple of years ago, when everything was just we were terrified to speak out, and there really wasn't any support to stand up on these issues when Amy did, and then shortly after, other people started joining on. I jumped into this conversation in 2021. Now there was I'm just going to read you here. Babs trying to say Hamm's position to not work in. So Amy said in the trial that she wouldn't work in any role that was directly working with trans people on a regular basis. She wouldn't work in an area of gender affirming care because it would be a conflict of interest. And if she was working with the public, she would recuse herself if that was an issue, so that the patient, she placed the patient's priority first. And Babs tried to say, or get the panel to imagine, and she tried this a couple of times in different ways, that Hamm was doing post-op care for a trans patient, and then I was asking the panel to imagine what this would be like, and I said, well, what are the communists going to just decide what role she's going to be in now, and then she's suddenly a problem? We continued for 5 or 7 minutes, Babs asking the panel to read, as with a rule of thumb, as a trans person being discriminated against, and asking this was rich, asking the panel or the college to ignore anything in Hamm's defense report that didn't have a footnote, saying that the culture wars weren't a thing. They're going to try and make you believe that the culture wars is all about cancellation. She painted this picture, and she said, but that's not in the footnotes. There's no evidence that was submitted to this effect. So you have to pretend as if this doesn't happen, or this isn't happening in the world at large. No evidence of the culture war was submitted. You're not charged to consider whether or not there is a culture war, according to Babs. And the argument is framed under culture wars, which you need to reject for want of evidence. And then she parenthetically said, admissible evidence. So she's saying you can only take what was submitted here in the chambers and ignore the rest of the world. And I posted, the party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command, which was George Orwell in 1984. And Lisa told me, might have been in November during the trials, that she was reading my notes from Twitter because I was doing a good summary. And the next day, when she opened up her arguments on Tuesday this week, when she was talking about Barbara Finley saying you have to ignore what's happening in the world and pretend there isn't a culture war because there's no footnote, she basically took my tweet and took the George Orwell quote and read it out. Now, I don't know if she read my tweets or not. that's now on the record anyway. She did a terrific job of just laying out reality on Tuesday,
Yeah.
and it my fears and my kind of shock and horror from the dark day that was Monday evaporated pretty quickly.
She was fiery. She was passionate. A few times the panel had asked her to slow down, and I was just like
Yeah,
following what she was saying. That yeah, there was a marked difference in tone between Lisa Bildy and Barbara Findlay, and Lisa sounded very, very upset and was like, I am not going to take this. I'm going to tell you exactly what's what. Yeah,
yeah,
I enjoyed that. I was unfortunately I had to drop out a few times on the second day because of work. But yeah, that was my general. I generally got a very staunch defense of free speech on day two.
yes. I'm going to scroll and see if I can find some of my notes from that day. It's been a busy week this week. Uh, One of the things that came up on Monday with Babs, and I
I
kind
think
of
that's
know
just her name now. It's just going to be Babs.
early in the day after this thing, you have to forget about the culture wars because they're not happening, right? We'll just gaslight that out of existence.
Yeah, don't
Uh,
look at it.
Finley said that we should disregard James Cantor's testimony, calling him sarcastically dismissive. And James, I hope you don't mind if I quote you here because James DM'd me. He said, sarcastically dismissive. I'm a gay Jew from New York. They have no idea what I can do if I want to be sarcastically dismissive. Uh,
Well, the woke mob, they don't like a sense of humor. They can't take it.
no,
It's not really
no.
surprising.
Uh, so where am I here? I'm gonna go. Gotta go back to Monday.
Imagine Babs cracking a joke. I can't even imagine that ever
No.
happening.
Um, so I'll read a couple here. It's assumed this is Lisa Bildy's defense on Tuesday. A democracy cannot exist without exploring new ideas. We can't change for the better, um, uh, because to do so requires constructive criticisms. Hyperbole and controversial speech may be required in the act of furthering the betterment of democracy and the betterment of society. Free expression, criticism, even blunt criticism, is essential to debate and open society. The minority must be able to speak in search of truth. Important to public policy, Hamm's advocacy needs to be protected, even if that advocacy is unpopular, vilified, and is coming from a minority of people speaking about this. There are people protected almost to a sacred degree where no criticism is permitted. It is more important now than ever to protect distasteful speech. If there are people who would seek to limit speech, and I bracketed AKA Babs. Yeah. So, I was doing my best here to not a lot of punctuation in the tweets, trying to catch the flavor of what was coming through. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. The integrity of systems is the best path, or to protect the integrity of systems is the best path. That's legal, medical, therapeutic systems. Silencing dissenting voices is rarely a sign of a healthy system. Now, the college labels Hamm's views as extremist. I firmly disagree with the notion that children are capable of providing informed consent for medical transition. That the college finds this to be extremism when other countries like the UK, Sweden, France, Norway, Finland, Germany are saying different. She should be lauded for her courage, not persecuted for speaking about her concerns that are now widely shared all over the world. So we have hope here. The panel could take 6 months to come up with their verdict, right?
6 months?
Yes.
Wow.
3 to 6 months is what seems to be floating around.
I think this shows us, though, pretty clearly that what I've been trying to say in my series, my series on queer kids and queer ideology, is that it's not this is the ideology uses the transsexual child or transsexual people. It uses them or the medical binary trans person. When I say binary trans person, I mean the trans person who, let's say, is female and they wish to medically transition to be male. And I'm going to conflate gender and sex here because that's what queer does. I know it says it's two different things, but they really do mean the same thing. So that idea of this binary, like wanting to perform the other sex, that isn't really what this whole thing is about. What this whole thing is about is on a bigger umbrella, and I think this trial shows this through what Babs was saying, is the non-binary trans person. And trans in this case doesn't really mean transsexual or even transgender. I've come to the conclusion it really means transgressing the gender binary. That's what trans kind of really is.
Interesting.
And so, right, it's the transgression of the gender binary. This is the core of the queer theory, really. And that has nothing to do with the medicalization. So if the medicalization disappears, which I truly believe it's on its way out very shortly. I mean, it's falling all over Europe. I think Canada, even, like, so the most diehard queer activists aren't actually in the medical field. They're people, well, maybe like Babs, but I think the medical field kind of follows because I don't know, they think they're helping and stuff like that. But for the most part, I think they're gonna wake up and they're gonna find it very difficult to justify this in the long term.
I think it's largely because no one's been allowed to speak, right?
There's that.
So yeah. I think most people don't agree with these things, but because the environment's been poisoned so badly by the activists and through this precedent scaffolding, right? So we've kind of learned that in a bunch of different institutions that if you go against the grain, like I forget the word you use for like the teaching profession, it's kind of like a unit of
I call socialism. It's a unit of socialism.
Unit of socialism,
yeah. Functional units of socialism outside of society.
And inside those units, you've got this captured or this bounded culture, this bounded domain of discourse, and you can't go against the norm. And if you do, you find yourself under investigation. You find yourself ostracized. You find yourself, potentially losing careers. All of this is very toxic, and it's very obvious in the education system, but that's the same thing in the medical system. It's the same thing in the legal system. It's the same thing if you're working at various levels of government. Our Ottawa municipal government is implementing, even with a non-progressive mayor, the groundwork for a multi-year DEI plan is in place, and they've got all this plans to deploy this through the municipal government. Like, it's everywhere.
Like, I know it's that bad in schools because that's where I focus my attention. It is that bad. Anyone listening? It's that bad. It's actually worse than that bad. And I'm going to do my best to explain it to you. But do you really think it's that as bad as schools in, say, the medical? I know it's probably that bad in psychology or the mental health. I absolutely 100% believe that. But do you really think it's as captured in the medical?
I think you can't know who to trust. You can't know who you can talk to or not. And I know a very prominent child psychiatrist in British Columbia who I've had some back channel conversations with. And he won't speak out.
But that's psych. That's what I mean. That's mental health.
Yeah. Well, he's a psychiatrist, so he's a medical doctor first.
Sorry, psychiatrist. I was lumping you in mental health. I'm still.
It's still mental health, but this is more pharmaceutical, and he's more administrative.
Yeah.
Because of his role, but he actually referred me and connected me to a couple people back in 2021, and then I haven't talked to him in a couple of years. He knows how bad it is. I can't say anything.
Well, all this just to say that there's the binary trans person and the non-binary trans person, and ultimately the binary medicalized trans person, as the activists will tell you themselves, are a tiny little minority of the population. Now, what isn't a tiny minority of the population is the non-binary trans person, which is much, much more of the ideological side of it, which doesn't necessarily need to be medicalized in any way. You can have a woman. I could call myself a they, them and fully adhere to the ideology. I could be a trans, queer, non-binary altogether individual who's a feminist and all these other things, right? And so that's much, much, much more prominent, and that is nothing to do necessarily with medicalization. So I think my point was just that I think that's kind of what we were seeing Babs express, and what we're seeing across Canada right now is that they're not going to necessarily immediately let go of this ideology, because it's not necessarily, they're using the binary trans kid, but it's more of it's not necessarily about them. I think more, my personal opinion is those who support this trend, well, no, I'm not going to say that. But yeah, anyway, that was the only point that I wanted to make. So it'll be interesting to see what decision comes out of this. Do you have any feelings what the decision might be?
Well,
Can you speculate? Oh, should we not speculate?
My speculation is, or I observe at this point, that the college is in a very tricky position because there's international scrutiny on this, right? Like J.K. Rowling, with I don't know how many millions of followers, retweeted I stand with Amy Hamm, and we have international sort of anti-woke pushback watching this. This elevates Amy. I mean, she's already been on some of the major US outlets through the course of this, and it elevates the issues of woke capture in Canada. Everyone's looking at Canada, and have been for a number of years, like, what the hell is going on? Canada is in real trouble. And so the College of Nurses and Midwives is in a position where if they find against Amy Hamm, then they're going to have a massive mountain of shit come down on them, and it's going to ignite all kinds of conversations. They're really, like we said earlier, they're behind the times here. They're fighting an issue as if it were 3+ years ago, when during the pandemic there was this total propaganda control and no dissent was allowed, and there was enough. The woke had reached sort of a critical mass, some pun intended there, that they could really control speech through intimidation and through these cancellation tactics. And I think we've moved out the other side of that, where it's a lot easier today to talk than it was a few years ago. A lot more people are talking openly now than in 2021. And then if they find that, well, I think they're actually
Amy, they're changing the precedent, right? So what that's saying is that opens a channel for free speech, or the ability to express your opinion that goes against the social justice narrative in a professional body. Now, recently, Jordan Peterson fought a similar battle with the College of Psychologists, and he lost. So this is going to be interesting, because
there's some distinction there, because Jordan Peterson is actually, let's say, a year to 2 years behind Amy Hamm.
Yeah.
Because Amy was ordered to, first of all, keep it quiet. And she said she wasn't going to keep the investigation quiet. And then she was found guilty. She was ordered to take social media training, and she was ordered to take down tweets. And she said no. And that's the point, and ordered for some retraining. And that's the point where Jordan Peterson is at right now. So Amy's further down that chain of precedent development, and pushing this issue than Jordan Peterson is at this point. I actually think that the college is probably more scared of the woke than the international blowback, which seems bizarre.
Why? But why? Why do you say that?
Because their institution is captured, and it's their colleagues, it's the activist nurses,
because they're facing it directly on a daily basis,
and they're baked in.
Yeah. Whereas
so
international pushback is that's out there, that's not in the house.
They've been through all of the DEI trainings. They've been through all of the dogma trainings, and these really manipulative double binds, like you're either an anti-racist, or unless you're an anti-racist, you're a racist, and unless you're an anti-transphobe, you're a transphobe. So they have been trained and indoctrinated within that institution to be activists, and they can't wrap their head around the fact that they're not
on the right
that's not
side of
their role.
history.
They're supposed to be politically neutral, and they shouldn't be involving themselves in political speech. And at the end of the trial on Tuesday, and we're going to jump to a couple other little news bits that build on some of the things we're saying here in a second. But they, yeah, I think they're really captured, and I think they're going to have a very hard time just recognizing that the position they're taking is political, and that they're taking a political side on an issue. Uh, um, if the capture goes as far as I think it does, then they think that they're right and that they're actually being neutral in their position, and everyone else is radical.
Yeah.
Um, and well, we can see it. So I'm going to share a screen here. We're using Zoom today instead of another platform. So share
Yeah,
sound.
you're either an anti-racist or you're racist.
Or
You're
you're
either,
racist.
yeah, and I love that because in my reading, I keep coming over and over with the Transforming Toolkit and the authors, the amount of times they talk about this binary thinking, right? And which is it's the massive amount of projection, this concept, because the binary thinking is so heavily coming from the ultra left, radical ideologues putting you in a category. If you don't agree with what we're doing, you're evil.
That's right. Yeah. Okay, so this is Chanel Fall. Chanel is a friend of mine, close friend. She's here in Ottawa. Lots of viewers know who she is. She has faced down several cancellation attempts from the Ontario Teachers College. Not to the same kind of long, and painful meat grinder process that Amy Hamm has been through, but Chanel's been dragged through a bunch of stuff, and she's really made a great name for herself by just investigating uh, teachers online on various platforms that are posting their ideological positions in the classroom. So this is Anni Ohana, a teacher at LA Matheson in Surrey, BC. She spends her days influencing kids. I'll just jump to some of the pictures. Here's the classroom that she teaches in. It's just plastered with slogans. We've got the revolutionary power fist. We're going to look at a few of these things that.
What this looks like? This to me looks like do you remember Forrest Gump? And then there was the new left radicals that were with the Black Panthers, and then that guy, the evil guy that was a Che wannabe, punched Jenny in that room. Was it in that room, or it would be something like that room with these radicals with like posters all over the walls of all of the radical events? That's just what this makes me think of. It's like a meeting of like new left radicals.
Yeah, except these are kids, right?
The kids in school.
Yeah. So Mustang Justice. Wow. We'll look at a few of these. The kids don't. Looks like a lunch and learn. Um, I learned that from Bill Maher last night. You're not allowed to say brown bagging anymore because that's racist. It's a lunch and learn. You see the Pride Progress flags up on the wall. Don't like looting, you'll hate the British Museum. This is all anti-colonial stuff, intersectionality, all kinds of, like she's wearing the equity shirts, Valentine's display. What are some of the other ones? Oh, bear with me. Going to a couple of other. So these are some of the other images that were in this teacher's classroom. Resisting colonialism is an essential service. This blows my mind. And I've said this before. This is a taxpayer-funded public education endeavor, right? This is a school. This is a teacher who's living off the taxpayer dime. And this is about tearing down the government.
Well, but also lying to parents about what it is that they're actually doing and getting upset when people point it out.
Yeah, here's a good one. This is a male nipple. So this is promoting women going topless, trying to normalize nudity. This one is a kind of crazy one. The power fist.
Yeah, I'm so happy we live in Canada because it's the most racist place in the entire world, and you'll hate it here because it's awful, basically.
Yeah. Between 2000 and 2017, I'll just read one of the ones that might be fine print for you. Um, we have 460 fatal conflicts with civilians in Canada between Canadians and police. So that's about 23 per year, 2 per month. It's tragic when people die in conflicts with the police. I don't want to minimize that at all. I'm just doing quick math here on average to get that 2 a month.
It's the
Uh,
manipulation of what the thing is to advance a cause. I mean, that's my problem with this.
yeah. Well, there are reasons, unfortunately, why police encounters end up with fatalities. In the vast majority of cases, police are dealing with somebody who is a threat to either their life or the lives of someone else's, and they intervene and they take serious firm steps to stop the behavior of the perpetrating individual. Now, once in a while, you get a rogue police officer, you get someone who's kind of outside the lines. There was an incident here in Ottawa a few years ago where the police officer was wearing basically gloves with built-in brass knuckles. These were armored gloves, and he was subduing an individual, and the individual died. Now, the gloves were an issue. I think that's more than necessary. Kind of, he has a weapon on his fists and he's punching somebody.
Those are illegal in the UK. Are they illegal here?
I don't know. There was a lot of talk about them a few years ago when this incident happened. The incident happened, I don't know, less than I'd say, kilometer and a half from where I am here. The individual had known mental health issues. The police didn't know him. It came out after the fact. He was a visible minority person. I want to say he was Muslim, but had like either schizophrenia or some sort of like serious mental health issue. He was grabbing women in a coffee shop, like groping them, being belligerent and he caused a serious scene in a coffee shop, sexually assaulting women, multiple. And he was chased out of the coffee shop, and the police were called, and they asked him to stop. And they went through their process of attempted de-escalation and to get the person to collaborate, and the person wouldn't, and they ran, and then there was a conflict with the police, and he was subdued, and consequent to that, he died. Well, this is not a simple situation. It wasn't the police going out of their way to kill somebody. In many of these cases, there are complicated stories, and same in the States. There's a lot of talk that police or there's a belief that police are indiscriminately killing Black people, and tragically, about 100 to 120 Black people, mostly men in the U.S., die at the hands of police every year. 85% of those are justifiable in the sense that the police life was in danger. The individual was armed and threatening themselves or other people. There was immediate threat. And unfortunately, one or two a month in the US out of 50 million police interactions a year, police make mistakes. But the narrative that this colonial government that we live in, that we're systematically killing Indigenous people, that what's another one here? Black drivers in Ottawa 2.3 times more likely to be stopped by the police. Well, the average age of a Black person in Ottawa is substantially lower than the general population. So younger people, particularly younger men, speed. There's a bunch of reasons beside racism and systemic oppression that explain the kinds of claims that they're making in these. Here's a good one. So normalizing sex workers. Again, this is that teacher in Vancouver. Now, what's she saying?
Backgrounds, all the amazingness, the amazing diversity that our school has. And yes, that diversity includes your identity, your orientation, and your biological sex. I want to finish with this. So the handprints you see actually were inspired by a gift from a student that made a handprint to introduce themselves to me about who they were.
There's that fist
And
on
so
a
we
t-shirt.
took that and we turned it into a
Yeah.
larger inspiration around the beautiful
I stand with
diversity
trans
that's in
things,
this
but she's not
land that we
indoctrinating.
stand on,
She's not
in the
political.
state that we call Canada, but more importantly to the Indigenous realities that have been here since time immemorial. We celebrate all people. We love all people. So I hope you continue learning with pride. I promise to continue teaching with pride. See you tomorrow.
The fist is everywhere. The fist is not an accident. The fist is a very clear symbol of Marxist praxis. This is activism, but not just any activism. This is like radical lefty stuff.
Oh.
There she goes with the fist again. She's telling you exactly where she's coming from. What kind of politics she's bringing to the classroom.
Uh-huh.
And again.
So let me see here. Here we go. Now I'm hoping that the sound comes through. I'm going to turn off my mic because
oh, hang on, just before. So Ohana, the teacher, was basically after Chanel had put out the tweet, the teacher went to Twitter to say, I need help. Could you report this account? She's a terrible teacher. She's lying about me, so on and so forth. And it got completely ratioed. People jumped on and said, you know, Chanel's not libeling you and you're indoctrinating kids or whatever. Like people got really upset. It was a huge ratio. So the teacher went straight that evening on speed dial, probably straight to the media. And this is the report.
Yeah. That teacher, by the way, I've come across her before, was nominated for $1 million prize in teaching. Now, being nominated, anyone can nominate anybody for the Nobel Peace Prize. So this is not an accolade to say you've been nominated, but she's on those kinds of lists. All right. So let me see if the sound comes through.
A Surrey teacher is speaking out over repeated harassment she's facing online. The harassment is targeted at educators and is only getting worse, according to groups that specialize in studying the far right. CTV's Isabella Zaffarisi has more.
The far right.
These are the posters and flags teacher Anni Ohana has hanging in her classroom. They're an important part of her curriculum.
And the goal is to actually have them think about it.
They're also part of the reason why Ohana was targeted online by Chanel Fall, a former high school teacher who says she now exposes wokeism in Canadian schools. Fall posted a photo on social media of Ohana's classroom, saying she's influencing kids to adopt her personal political beliefs and needs to be fired.
I was very disappointed because they seem to be making a lot of assumptions that just simply were based on complete misinformation, lies, and in fact puts myself and other teachers and students in my community in danger.
CTV News reached out to Fall, who doubled down, saying any reasonable person who looks through her thousands of posts on X will see that she's indoctrinating kids with radical woke ideology.
We're not indoctrinating anybody. What we're doing is building really strong, empowered citizens that can speak up for themselves.
This isn't the first time this has happened, but it is the first time Ohana has spoken publicly about it.
I think really the call out was to make sure that other teachers knew it's okay to ask for help, that you don't have to suffer in silence.
According to the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, harassing educators is on the rise, stemming from opposition to sexual orientation and gender identity education.
What we're seeing is an increase in attacks on teachers themselves through harassment campaigns, emails, social media attacks, and it's potentially very dangerous.
I'm thinking of the teachers that can't be in front of you right now, that are so scared, that are going on long-term stress leaves, right? This is absolutely having an impact.
And just like the posters in her classroom, Ohana plans on using this online interaction as a teachable moment. Isabella Zaffarisi, CTV News, Surrey.
Let me tell you why she is indoctrinating. If nothing else, someone pointed out to me that, you know, because I don't think teaching should be political, but someone pointed out to me that even I have my own way of looking at the world, and I guess that's a form of politics. And so in some respects, maybe education is political in one way or another. But the reason that this is indoctrination is that they are not telling the truth. If there was some kind, at some point, of public discussion or meeting or engagement process that was being honest, that basically, I don't know, the ministry said that we wish to use social justice and be honest and say what that is far left radical, socialism principles, and we want to bring those into the classroom. We believe that this is going to create thoughtful citizens. We believe it's going to do this, and we could actually have a proper debate on it. That would be a different story. If the country had turned around and decided, you know what, we do want to do equity, diversity, and inclusion, but by fully understanding what it is that they're getting into. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is that these people have done it. They've done it without consultation. They've done it because they believe they're right. And they're silencing or attempting to silence anyone who dares to even question what it is that's going on. They've accused Chanel. She's accused Chanel of harassment. All Chanel did was show what is in this classroom, right? So to me, that's what the indoctrination is. If you are not honest and you are manipulating by manipulating language to try to get your view of the world in and exclude everything else out, what else do you call that? I call that indoctrination.
Yeah. It's leaving out major parts of the story. And I don't know, there's that constant question: do these people really believe what they're doing, or are they acting out of malice or self-interest or what have you? These are union members. They're trained in activist teachers colleges. They are in environments. She's saying, teachers are getting investigated because of these complaints. Well,
they should be.
They should be, yes. But there are a lot more teachers getting investigated for questioning these things because the environment's become so poisoned, just like for Amy Hamm, who can't speak out as a nurse, just like Chanel Fall, who criticized Black Lives Matter in a private Facebook group of teachers. So not in a classroom, but criticized the movement as a political movement, saying the classroom environment should be apolitical, which is Chanel's principled stand. And teachers, I heard this week there are 30,000 people in Ontario who could be teaching right now, teachers who are not teaching.
Why is that?
And well, there's a bunch of reasons. Some of it's political. Some of it's the work environment is so toxic. People, like, there are more teachers leaving Peel region, which is the second largest school board in Canada, leaving the board, quitting basically, than are retiring. Mm-hmm. I know teachers who've been investigated. I know one teacher was fired here in Ottawa for reposting Douglas Murray and Dr. Deborah So, who's a sexologist and a neuroscientist.
These guys really do not see that they are destroying their own profession. And they're doing that because they're not being honest. They're doing that because they're assuming that they are somehow superior and that anyone who disagrees is a problem for them. And the politics has become the number one most important thing to do and to push forward, rather than education itself. I mean, I read a report that I'm not allowed to talk about that shows that very, very clearly, which I hope I'll be able to talk about soon. But they're not seeing the destruction of their... This is the thing with socialism, is that it always ends up destroying what it aims to make equitable.
Well, when their primary mantras include disrupt and dismantle, and you've got that fist and it's revolutionary, like they want to take down the system.
Absolutely, 100%. Well, they want to take down the hegemony, right? But what they don't understand is that stability is really important. And so the vision of the socialist is that if you disrupt the dominant and you liberate. So liberation is a really great word. It sounds lovely, but in their minds, once you've reached liberation, everything's going to be perfect, right? You're going to move into the actual...
Yeah, somehow utopia is going to move in to fill the vacuum.
It emerges from it. But that has never happened in the entire history of mankind. We have never gotten to a place where we've completely destroyed things that were working fine before, and then some magical outcome of perfection has come out of that. Now, the argument with the socialist is, well, true communism has never been tried, which is true. They're right, because the whole point is that socialism is just a step to communism. Now, the communism really just is that utopia that emerges after the destruction. Well, they're right. We've never got there, and we never will get there, because the vacuum that gets filled before communism is things like North Korea, is things like China. And they'll say, oh yeah, but they've become a neoliberal. China's neoliberal now. It's not really communist. Well, there's a reason for that, guys, because communism is just not, anyway, I'm going on a rant here, but I would just like these people to be able to see that what they are doing does not lead to anywhere useful. And if your goal is to actually help people, it's just not going to work. And I so
a couple of things coming up. And I want to talk about one more news bit. Actually, Melanie, your coverage of a presentation by Faye Johnstone. I want to jump to, but I want to give listeners and viewers a little preview, and we'll have video clips of this coming up soon. Both Chanel and I have been approved to delegate to the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. And I was approved more than a month ago. I asked for the maximum allowable time, which for the Ottawa board is 4 whole minutes. There's not a lot you can say in 4 minutes, but it helps us get on the record. And I was told that I was approved for April 2nd. I got an email yesterday saying, we want you this Tuesday, whatever the date is, 26th or 27th, and you have 2 minutes. And 2 minutes is like 2 television commercials. It's almost no time. Chanel was also approved for 2 minutes. So both her and I are delegating to the school board on Tuesday about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I pushed the administrator to allow me to make a written submission. I'm allowed to give a 1-page synopsis. And they don't want to hear from us, right? And the rules say that a person can only delegate on the same topic once a year. And so a year ago this week, I delegated to the OCDSB, and I did get my 4 minutes, and I talked about Article 2B of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Canada, freedom of expression. And I applied several months later because something was topical and was related to what the board was doing. And I was told I couldn't because I presented already within a year. And I said, but this is an entirely different topic. And they said, no, that's the policy. So they went against their own policies to cite to tell me I couldn't delegate. I applied again in November and said, I've applied. This is, again, totally different topic. This is the last time I talked. They said, we'll allow you to make a written submission. So I don't get to stand before the board. I just get to hand in some documents. The public doesn't get to see it really. And then I get more than a year later now, I'm getting my 2 minutes, and they won't let me speak again for a year because of their policy. So they don't want people to hold the mirror up to what they're doing. They don't want to hear about DEI. I'm going to be unsurprised if Horizon Ottawa and a bunch of woke activists are flooding in there at the same time to say yay equity and yay diversity, and we'll get a bunch of Anni Ohanas in there wearing their power fist shirts and what have you. So it's still important to do. I really believe it. Whether it's municipal politics or whether it's school board politics, we need to get involved. It's not a big deal to write up a 2-minute speech, and people hate public speaking. But if you have the willingness, I suggest wherever you are in Canada, if you have an opportunity to speak before your school board and you're concerned about these things, make it a point to know what's going on, and make it a point to apply and ask to be a delegate to make your voices heard. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to jump over to Faye. So Melanie, what do we have here? We got.
Did you want to do the whatchamacface, the article first? I can go through my.
Oh yeah. So there's a CBC article here. Here's our friend Faye Johnstone. Faye, I literally almost bumped into Faye in a downtown office building a couple of weeks ago. He was sitting there on his phone about 4 feet from me as I walked by. So here's the typical, CTV is in BC was playing to Annie's poor me narrative. Here's a couple of creators saying that life's getting hard online for them and they're getting constant pushback from the public, and poor Dylan Mulvaney lost his place on the Bud Light can and cost NBev like $14 billion in market cap. Oh, yeah. Speaking of Dylan Mulvaney here, the Lady Gaga. This is gross. This was the Women's Day thing.
I don't know why everyone cares about Dylan Mulvaney. The thing is, right? Like, he's really not that, and he's really, like, if you ignore him, he'll go away. The only reason he's that big is because people keep giving him so much attention. I don't see the big deal. I think we need to start ignoring people because that's what they're doing. They're just trying to attention seek.
Yeah. Here we're victims of hate, and anyone who criticizes us, just like the whole reason for the Amy Hamm trial, any criticism is hatred.
Yes.
This made a splash last year on Women's Day when Hershey's made Faye Johnstone the female spokesperson for Women's Day, oh, we're going to use social media to fight back. But we have, unlike being demoralized, like Monday was kind of demoralizing when Babs had the day and was building up this argument against Amy Hamm and things were looking dark. But actually, we are making progress. And in the words of the activists themselves, that's the case. Now, do you know which video is which here, Melanie?
Yeah.
We can also reject the premise our opposition is putting on the table. This is not a fight between children's rights and parent rights. Again, this is about schools where everyone has the freedom to be themselves. If we allow them to set the narrative, we will lose these battles. Because, shockingly, the term parental rights is really appealing to people. Who would want to have the rights of parents taken away? Of course we wouldn't want to take away the rights of parents doing their best to raise their kids. And so we have fallen for their trap on this issue and many others. We need to be speaking with one voice and shaping the narrative, again, about schools where everyone has the freedom to be their authentic self. We can also reject the premise our opposition is putting.
So this is Faye Johnstone a few weeks ago giving a keynote
Post or a hot
take. Before we go there, Shannon. Yeah, so this is Faye. If we could go back to the post. So Faye gave a keynote speech to a group of diehard believers. Now, if you could click on the YouTube link, I just want to see the name of the organization because I think it matters. Because I just want to see the name of the org. Yeah, this was the Community-Based Research Center, and I've seen that they've put out they put out quite a few little talks and keynote speeches. And so again, this is a group of diehard trans believers. And Faye was giving a talk about trying to build up a positive feeling about the movement. I think there was a feeling that the movement had taken some hits over the last year, like we just saw Faye in an article talking about the increased amount of trans hate. This was a theme in this talk. Another theme was, well, where are we not doing so well? Where are we doing better? And so this is why I wanted to bring it to the attention of people, because there's a few things that I noticed in this talk. And that was the first one was the parental rights. Now, Faye is placing it like, this is not what we're doing. But the key message in there is that Faye is telling us, everyone, that the message of parental rights resonates with the average Canadian and is not working in favor of the trans community when they're talking about transing kids, right? Because the way that you hear over and over again, and I made this argument, and I pointed out this argument in a video that I made, that the activists keep saying, you don't own your kids, you don't own your kids. No one is saying that we own our children, but because that's how they view it, they view the nuclear family as a private property ownership. They view it as individual rights as private property as well. And so in their minds, they think we view it as private property. Now we don't, because we're not socialists. We're not this mystical capitalists that they think we are, but that's how they view it. But that's a losing argument for them. And I think that they've felt that within the movement. So I thought that was a really important point to bring forward from that talk. And that also comes on the back of the tone of this video is very much, we need to take as in the trans activism community, need to take a step back from accusing people all the time. Because that's not being received very well. People are rising up against us. This was a very strong theme in that talk. And Faye is saying, look, we should go to the people who have PPC signs in their front garden. We should go talk to them and be friendly to them. We should bring them on side. We shouldn't shout hate at them. We shouldn't shout awful things at them and call them names. We should try to befriend them. Those people at protests, don't assume that they're bigots. Go talk to them and be friendly to them. This is a marked change in tone and attitude, because I think that they are feeling that people are not having this and they're losing their cause. So I thought this video was very, very interesting, and it is recent, and they are talking to other true believers. Now there's another video that we could play, because another thing that Faye brings up is the discord within the left, the far left movement. Faye talks about how they need to work together more. They need to argue less. And Faye also pointed out that the million marches have been a bit of a problem for their narrative because they're so diverse. And I think this is the video.
We also have to have kitchen table conversations. This is the most important thing to me right now. When we see disinformation in the air, an Instagram post, unfortunately, is not going to bring anyone on side.
Well, this might not be
a Twitter post or a hot take in an interview where you call Pierre Poilievre a fascist, while important and likely to get you the reshares from every other gay person who follows you, is not going to bring along the communities who aren't in these bubbles with us. We need to be chatting with our neighbors. We need to get back to those basics that our elders have used time and again to understand that marriage equality isn't just about giving the gays those things, but again about building a world where everyone is free to be themselves and where the government doesn't get in the way of our ability to love who we love and live our lives on our terms. And we do that by being curious, by sticking to those shared values. Everyone deserves to be safe in their communities. No politician should ever be using the public's lack of familiarity with trans people to pit communities against themselves. We can reject those tactics because they have been used time and time again on the most marginalized in our communities, as to use them as scapegoats to roll back the rights and progress of many. We can have those conversations even when people don't disagree with us or don't agree with us. We don't need to be going and chatting with the explicit homophobes and transphobes, but I want you to talk to the person who works at your convenience store. I want you to talk to the neighbor that may have had a PPC sign on their lawn. I want you to talk to your parents who might still vote conservative. And to have those conversations, not in a way where we're angry, not in a way where we're calling them homophobes or transphobes for disagreeing with us, but where we help pull them along to dream of that better world with us. Because at the end of the day, most people showing up at these parental rights rallies don't know much about the policies that we're fighting in those provinces. They've been captured by a far-right machine that is bringing them into that hate and conspiracy. And if we can be the person offering an olive branch that doesn't reject the humanity of our communities, but rather invites them into these spaces with us, we can take the wind right out from under our opposition.
Yeah, I had to speed that up because I can only have videos that are 140 seconds long. So I hope that was okay with that voice. But that was what I was just saying. The tone is different. Don't shout them down anymore. Let's try to be more friends with them. Let's try to calm the discord within our own movement. There is another video. I think it was the one after that. So I just wanted to see if we could play the Million March one. Because sure. I think those three messages were actually really, really interesting. And I think it says a lot about what's going on internally with them.
We also have to have kitchen table.
Oh, not that
I thought that voice modulation was the hormones are really kicking in. But let's try this.
Vision and to pull those and uplift multiply marginalized voices. I think one of the elephants in the room right now is that as we saw the September Million March rallies, there were a lot of faith-based communities in those spaces. And the thing that we didn't realize was that we gave them the opportunity to do that. And I say that myself as a white lady on this stage. We as a community, by creating and perpetuating a narrative about queerness that centers white people, gave them the opportunity to plant division and to pull those cracks apart and pit ourselves against one another. I don't pretend to have the solutions on how we solve that piece, but I know it means we have to engage with those communities who have been traditionally excluded from our spaces. That we need to build those bridges and again recognize that if we are not working together, if we are not recognizing the problems in our own spaces while building bridges with communities that are different from ours or different from ourselves, that we will not win.
Yeah, so the overall tone here, I mean, it's worth watching the entire video. I think it's about an hour long, but the tone is markedly different. I think that there's it's showing, if you read between the lines, it's showing that they're having some difficulty. I think they've noticed that the tone is changing. They're feeling the threat and they're trying new tactics. And I do think that Faye Johnstone is a tactical individual. Faye Johnstone's, both of Faye Johnstone's parents are functionaries in Ottawa. I think that they're used to being around politics and being political. And I certainly think that they have a network of people to help them. And yet still the tone was, hang on, guys, we need to regroup and rethink this because maybe it's not working out too much for us. Now, Faye doesn't use those words, but that's essentially the message in that video. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's coming very clear to more and more people that this is a totalitarian, authoritarian movement. And the words that Faye is saying here, to me, ring very hollow because it's still the standard playbook to call anyone who disagrees with you, anyone who criticizes you. If you say that women deserve to have women's spaces, then that's discriminatory against trans women and trans girls, and therefore that's bad. And the persecution of people continues. I think at this point it's just lip service. And
He's talking to a crowd of true believers, right? So the true believers are not going to say that males don't belong in female spaces. They're not going to say that. What I found interesting is just how the message that Faye is conveying to the crowd of true believers. Faye is not speaking to the general public. Faye is speaking to others. Faye is trying to convince the TRA community to change the way they treat people because it's not working. That's the gist of this video.
Yeah.
And the examples that I thought were most interesting are, let's stop the infighting. Let's try to get more friends on side. And the million marches really destroyed us. Oh, and parental rights is a bad tactic for us, guys. Let's stop doing it.
Yeah. I think that the million marches and what's happening in Canada, from my own experience, is very organic. It's very grassroots. It is not engineered the way this transactivism is. It's not top-down funded like Faye Johnstone is. And Faye recognizes that there's a change in government coming, and that the Wisdom to Action, or whatever his organization is likely going to lose funding.
I think it's Momentum.
Well, yeah, Momentum, and there was another one that he was involved with called Just the Tip or something like that, which is like
that is awful. If you haven't checked out Just the Tip, it's this comprehensive sex ed thing. It's just but
yeah.
anyway.
So I think Faye, partly it's self-interest. Faye wants to present some kind of reasonableness to be able to justify continued funding after the government changes. But I think likely when the red pen comes out to strike off budget line items, that organizations like Johnstone's,
his entire career is dependent on being able to continue the incremental advancement of his ideology, which is queer Marxism, which is what it is. So he needs to find ways to convince the crowd, hey guys, stop, this isn't going to help us. Stop doing that because we need to get paid.
So we can only hope, I think, that the BC nurses and midwives recognizes the writing on the wall, a bit like Faye Johnstone is right now, and that there is some self-reflection that happens. And it's extremely hard for these people to self-reflect and say, hey, maybe we're going a little overboard here, and calling people hateful bigots is not winning us friends and influencing people. So lots of great things happening. I think, even though I had to listen to Faye Johnstone's voice there, this is a positive end to the weekly Canadian Gender Wars for the week. Do you have anything big coming up, Melanie?
Well, it depends on what you mean by big. I'm currently stitching together part 2 of my queer Marxism video. I'm going to, so I've been, I took some time off. I had a neck injury, and then I didn't know what I was going to do moving forward with these videos. The reason I've taken time out to think about how I'm going to put it together is because there's actually quite a lot to talk about in terms of the authors. So the next step I want to take is talking about the authors. And there's so much to go through, especially with Wayne Martino, who I started the part 2 about. Wayne Martino is the principal investigator of the entire project. He's also the main author of the Trans Affirming Toolkit for Ontario Educators. And he has an extensive body of work, so I had to pick what I wanted to talk about in his particular body of work. And I'm trying something, so if you guys like the video and you like me going through some of the academics and explaining it, then let me know and I'll continue doing that. And I do want to do other parts. I do want to continue with my analysis, pardon me, of the Trans Affirming Toolkit and of the academics supporting that. And the reason I want to is because teachers teach in school, we know that, and they get trained in teacher college. The people that I'm most interested in are the people teaching or educating the educators. Now, Wayne Martino is one of these people. He's the trainer that trains the trainers. He's the teacher that teaches the teachers. And those individuals, what I found is that they tend to be very explicit in saying, 1, that this is political, 2, how it's political, 3, how they're going to inject it into the classroom and how important it is for them. And they keep saying it over and over and over again. So I showed this with Peter McLaren. Now, Peter McLaren is an old school Marxist. He's a classical Marxist. And, he says himself in many of his writings that he doesn't like this identity politics. I think he even commented on my video about him that he doesn't like identity politics, but he's a Marxist and he's done his version, and that's progressed over the decades, and now it's become identity politics and been replaced by people like Wayne Martino, who is still a Marxist, but of the queer theory origin, but now does intersectional critical theory as well. So I'm going to go through some of that. I'm not going to go through it in as much detail as I would like, but I'm trying to keep them short but informative. And the other authors who I will probably cover as well in a level of detail with some interpretation are Kenan Omerakcik. Omerakcik, he is a co-author. He's a previous PhD student of Wayne Martino, who now works at the Ottawa Carleton District School Board in policies. This is really, really, really important. Kenan Omerakcik is absolutely a true believer. And I can tell through his writings that he's 100% a true believer. So he's somebody to watch. He works in policy. What that means is that not only does he believe deeply in this social justice, far left radical ideology. When I say radical, I mean they want to completely disrupt the entire system. They want to destroy it. And they're telling you how. But he works in policy in a school board, which means that he is responsible for setting the rules of what happens within that school board. Okay, so that's really important. So these kind of people, they do want to seek those positions of authority. So I'm going to be definitely covering Kenan Omerakcik. He also says some very interesting things in the release video from Western University. I think he's probably the most militant when it comes to the intersectional stuff. There's also another author who is a current PhD student of Wayne Martino. And her name is Jenny Casson. She's another author. I don't think she has as much a role. I may just mention her briefly. I think that this is a they, them, which could turn around, but, is on the cusp, still very young. Maybe could have a moment, but who knows? So I'm going to be a little bit kinder to Jenny than I am going to be with Kenan and with Wayne. So that's what I'm working on right now. And I'll be doing that in between recording our weekly gender wars, whether we do them or not. So we'll see when they come out. I'll do my best to do it besides this injury.
We're trying to drop them on the same day.
Yeah.
I'm working on a little bit of side writing and project myself. I have another YouTube channel that I created a few years ago, and some of my close friends and family know that I've been studying comparative religion and mythology for, seriously about 25 years. And it's been a lifelong interest for me. So there's been some conversation in the anti-woke world about things like Gnosticism, Hermeticism, and alchemy being this through line. So James Lindsay, who we talk about a lot with a lot of great things to say about him, has jumped onto a bandwagon saying that
the Gnostic cult,
basically the Hellenistic cults have been a secret religion, and they influenced Hegel and Marx, and they're the through line to modern Marxism and communism. And I completely reject that hypothesis. Or is it a theory?
That's a hypothesis.
It's a hypothesis. because I think that there's a lot of really valuable insights into a philosophy. So we call it Gnosticism, Hermeticism. The top line slogan, if you want to call it that, is "Gnothi se auton." It means know thyself, and it's to look inwards and say, who am I, and what do I believe, and what do I think, and how do I feel? What's my relationship with God? And that's the antithesis of the group identity politics that we have right now. We're asking kids, figure out your gender, and figure out your skin identity, or your cultural identity based on your skin, and figure out your sexual identity, and that's who you are. It's all external, immutable characteristics, and you get to know who you are by your identity group. And this early philosophy. And there's some nice, like really interesting overlap, like Gnostic Christianity was kind of an early mystical Christianity that I'm fascinated by. So I'm doing that on my other channel called Chasing Quicksilver, and putting up a video here and there. It's a little weird for some people because we don't
I'm going to
normally
say this, okay? So I had discussions with you, Shannon, early on because I'd listened to James Lindsay and the Gnostic stuff, and it sort of makes sense. Even I'm not spiritual, so this was new to me, and I guess it kind of made sense when I was trying to figure out what a lot of this ideology was, because I've been ideologically focused for a while. And as I've come through and read more and more, I can say I have not actually seen evidence of a Gnostic sex cult in the literature or in the videos from the socialists speaking themselves on this particular topic. Now, that's not to say that there's a removal of boundaries and making everything acceptable, all okay, especially when it comes to sex and gender. And so there are people taking advantage of this lack of boundaries and everything goes kind of attitude. And there is sexual abuses of all kinds. But I'm not seeing that as a motivator or as an actual reason why they're doing it.
or as a philosophical underpinning. Yeah.
I have said to you recently too, I was like, I think you might have a point because I've not come across it. I know it's a hypothesis. Haven't come across it yet.
I think there's a religiosity. I think
Yes.
there are religious currents to what's happening with
there's
this, with
faith-based,
the woke
yes.
cult. There is a frame of faith, but it's not something that we can point to.
There's no evidence that is a Gnostic, specifically Gnostic. That's what I'm trying to say. Is I'm not seeing that. There's definitely faith. You have to be faithful in this idea that there just is oppression, that this oppression is everywhere, and you have to uncover it. And you can only uncover it by liberating all these particular identities that you can go into. Like there's that. But I'm not seeing anyone talking about the spiritual element. For one, I don't even think they realize they're being religious. And two, nobody's talking about Gnosticism. I've seen them very much talk about socialist topics hugely, no doubt about that, but I've not yet seen Gnostic. So I will back you up on that, and I've yet to watch your videos, but I can't wait to watch them.
Well, I appreciate it. I think that's a wrap for this week. We will check in again in 7 days' time. And as always, we love your comments on videos. Let people know what we're doing. If you're kind of peaked on this topic, we want to get this out to as many people across Canada as possible. We really appreciate you watching through the videos, and the more people we can talk to, the more people we're going to have out for big marches this year. September 20th is again the Million March date that we've set. Various groups are agreeing on, and June the 3rd, a big day of absence that's planned. We had a Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada meeting this week, and we are going to do another summit kind of event, or a panel event, coming up in the middle of May before everyone packs up for the summer and heads off to the cottage. So we're looking at dates right now and what the format's going to be. We really want to give people the tools to have big conversations with friends and loved ones over the summertime, as we socialize with friends and family, and that's how we're going to change the world on this. It's we're really moving in the right direction. And the last thing I'll say is, like, cross fingers for Amy Hamm. Amy, you were awesome. I can only imagine what it was like going through it. And it's over now, and all we got to do is wait, and everyone's crossed their fingers for you.
Well done.
Have a great weekend, Melanie.
Have a great weekend, Shannon.